So I just finished watching Emilia Perez, and honestly, I don't even know where to begin. When I finished the movie as a non-Mexican, non-Spanish speaker, who grew up on movies like Desperado, Once Upon a Time in Mexico, I already had a few issues with it. Now, usually when I finish watching a movie, I'll go online and I'll look up some reviews just to see what everyone else is saying about the motion picture. And, not to my surprise, I found that a lot of the reviews were negative. But when I actually did some more research, that's when I realized it was actually far more worse than I had thought. By the way, my name is Chuck and I'm a writer and an aspiring filmmaker. If you like this video, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Leave us a comment as well. Let us know your thoughts on the movie, whether you enjoyed it, whether you feel like they could have done a few things better. Let us know in the comments. And if you're feeling generous and if you really enjoyed this video, please go ahead and consider subscribing as well. Obviously, as a non-Spanish speaker, I had no idea that the Spanish in the movie that was so awful. And honestly, that's just the language. There's a few other things that they really got wrong with the movie. Firstly, the theme of the movie is really off. I had a really hard time grasping what they're trying to communicate to us. Is it that when you undergo a sex change, no matter what sins you committed in the past, if you commit to that sex change, you can then reinvent yourself and erase your sins? Was that the theme? And the characterization too. Honestly, there's a lot of performances in this movie that are incredible. Zoe's performance is amazing. Her dancing, her singing, even just the way she brought to the film was really, really awesome. And of course, Karla Sofia's performance really grounded the movie, and in my opinion, is the best performance of the movie. However, I really feel that Selena Gomez's performance was borderline terrible, and in my opinion, they should have casted someone else. I'm actually very disappointed in this movie because it actually sounds great on paper, right? On paper, what we have here is a very interesting story, right? Someone who, used to be in the drug world, considers transitioning and becoming someone else. And throughout that journey, they learn to give back to the community, to do better and try and make up for their past. And of course, on the other end, someone who was borderline a corrupt lawyer, just the way she was doing things, also gets redeemed by taking part in this. And honestly, the script had a lot going for it, right? It had awesome Mexican culture. It was supposed to be great Spanish music and choreography, and it's also a thriller at the same time, and it also tackles things like crime, immigration, trafficking, kidnapping, drugs. It really had a lot going for it. Unfortunately, the execution was terrible. My first real problem with the movie is who exactly is the main character here? Is it Rita or is it Emilia? If it's Rita, personally, her character arc is essentially non-existent. She undergoes no significant transformation, and she really doesn't do anything really significant in the movie besides helping Emilia out. So then, does that mean Emilia is our main character? Because if that's the case, then the only transformation Emilia had was physical. She essentially came across to me as someone who, after undergoing her sex change, pretended that she was an entirely different person without her past. It was almost as if her having a sex change essentially erased everything that she had done in the past and sort of erased her sins, which didn't make sense to me. There was no element of regret on her part with the things she's done in the past. In fact, the organization she uses to help said victims that, she actually contributed to hurting is actually started from leftover money that she had made from running the cartel. So to me, that's a very terrible character arc, and it's a terrible theme overall about our main character. And essentially, if you look at her entire arc, Emilia starts off as a cartel boss, right? But then essentially, by the end, she's gone back to her ways. She's torturing people, threatening people, extorting people, freezing people's accounts. So she essentially has no transformation whatsoever. Is that what they're saying to us here? Because it didn't seem like that was their intention, even though that's what ended up happening anyway. And of course, a really big problem with this movie is their chat GPT Spanish. It's absolutely terrible. I really understand the outrage of so many Mexicans and other Spanish speakers out there. The outrage really comes from the fact that the director seemed to be really arrogant about this and has been quoted making statements like, "I already know everything I need to know about the movie." So it shows us that he actually didn't bother doing any form of research, and when it came to actually hiring people to help with the translation, it seems as though that was either non-existent or it was very lazy on his part. Now, of course, I'm not part of the LGBTQ community, but personally, from my standpoint, I actually believe that, someone who was a drug lord undergoing a sex change transformation to transition, and then getting their sins erased and pretending to be an entirely different person after that, with no remorse or no regret, immediately after undergoing this sex change, seems to skew more towards the logic that Hollywood elites would use versus the everyday trans person. Okay. I feel like I've trashed the movie enough, so let's go over how we would actually go about fixing this and what I feel the studio and the screenwriter should have done in order to improve the movie. Now, first things first, Selena Gomez needs to go. I'm sorry for all their fans out there, but honestly, her performance in this movie was actually very terrible. It was dry and her Spanish was actually terrible. In my opinion, they would have been better served by casting someone like Adria Arjona. So that's who I would have called over to replace her in this casting. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Now, admittedly, I have a huge crush on Adria, but there actually is a good reason for this choice. Firstly, she actually speaks beautiful Spanish.
Y es la verdad, me pueden venir y platicar conmigo porque yo lo hago por ello.
So she's actually perfect for this role, and she actually grew up in Mexico. So she can actually bring a lot of relevance and understanding of the culture, which can help ground the movie and help get the cultural representation much more accurate. And of course, I don't have to tell this to anyone who's seen her act, she's actually a brilliant actress. Now, if you haven't seen Blink Twice, go ahead and check out on Blink Twice to really understand my point. She gives an incredible performance there. Now, that's the casting. Other than Selena Gomez, the casting is actually really good. Emilia Perez's casting is fantastic. Manita's casting is fantastic. And of course, Zoe Saldana is one of the best actresses out there. She's highest paid for a reason. Now, let's move on to the plot. For the plot of this movie, I would have taken a very proven 5-act structure, whereby each act has its own individual story elements that contribute to the overall storytelling process. So that means each act would have a protagonist, an antagonist, an inciting incident, a desire or journey, a crisis, a climax, as well as an optional resolution. So let's dive into Act 1 and how that would flow. So the first act, in my opinion, should all be about Manitas. So since we're establishing that Emilia Perez is our main character, and that Rita would be more of our supporting or co-main character in this screenplay. So the protagonist is, of course, Emilia, or Manitas in this case, before the sex change, and then the antagonist would actually be a character that I would add to the screenplay, which would be someone like a mentor to Manitas. So this would be an uncle, a grandfather, or even a father who is essentially pulling the strings in the background of the cartel, and then having Manitas as the front-facing man. Or we could say this is someone that he was grooming to take over for him. And this would explain why he felt like he was forced into the life, and it would also explain why he feels like he needs to go to such dramatic lengths in order to escape said life. Now, the inciting incident would be something that they actually mentioned in passing, which would be killing off a rival cartel member. But how I would actually switch this up is I would actually add that Manitas actually kills said uncle or father during this ordeal in order to frame it as a casualty of the battle. And of course, we would say that the reason he was forced to actually execute him in this period is because he actually uncovered that he's been undergoing these preparations in order to go through the surgery, and confronts him about it, and this forces Manitas' hand. Now, his desire would be simple, of course, would be to break free from the iron boot of his father, and of course, being the leader of the cartel. Now, the crises would be, there being some conflict and really some problems and some issues in terms of the power struggles after he executes his father or uncle, and of course, him having to figure out how to calm everyone down, make sure that he continues his plan without being caught, and of course, the most important thing, figuring out how he's actually going to keep his kids in his life after the transition. And then the climax could be him simply finding out about Rita and simply giving out an order to one of his henchmen for them to actually kidnap her, and that would be the end of the first act. Very, very simple, very, very straightforward. By essentially adding an older figure, a mentor or father, to Manitas, it helps us make much more sense of why he was a cartel leader for so long, but still felt like he was trapped and he was born into this life and didn't have a choice. So, moving on to Act 2. Act 2 could actually be happening in parallel to while everything is happening with Manitas as well, for it to make sense chronologically. And for Act 2, we're going to be focusing on Rita, so we can introduce her more and really help ground her as a character, because right now she feels a little bit in the air in the script. She feels more like Emilia's yes ma'am errand girl or slash errand girl, so it's better if we ground her and actually give her a lot more structure and a lot more room for us to develop a really solid character arc with her as well. Here's something I picked up. We actually get no motivation for Rita's involvement in the law firm and the shady practices. Now, of course, it's sort of framed as if she just loves money or just needs money, but typically that's not enough for an arc like hers. Based on her behaviors as an attorney, there seemed to be a lot of corruption with her and the people that she was working with in terms of really helping the people they were working with get away with really serious crimes and the way they were framing it as well. So in my opinion, Rita does not have a strong enough motivation for her actions. So what if we introduced another character here, either a mother, I would probably say a sister, who actually has a chronic illness and needs a lot of money for her to recover. And the reason Rita is working so hard in the law firm, despite the fact that they're abusing her, is so she can pay for her hospital bills. And the reason Manitas is actually able to exploit her in the first place and get her to do what he wants is he actually discovers this about her and actually finds that it's actually a weakness he can exploit, and then he uses it to get what he wants from her by offering her the $2 million. Now that makes a lot more sense and actually flows much more better with her arc, because if you look at when she does become rich, someone who had been following her path would have probably started her own law firm and continued on her way where she has more power and more control, but instead it's framed as if once she gets the money, she becomes a good person. Now we all know that's just not how money works. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. As an attorney, she has some power, which she does abuse, from my perspective. Now, of course, if you disagree with this, you can let me know. But from my perspective, it seems as though she does abuse her power as an attorney. So why would she stop doing this once she actually gets rich? So, of course, it makes sense that if she's actually motivated by a much more personal reason. The inciting incident could be her mother needing surgery much more sooner than she expected. Maybe there's a complication and she needs a transplant and she needs to scramble funds, so she's panicking about that. And, of course, her desire is to actually save her mother. And what's really interesting about this is we can also go into the fact that she spent so much time working trying to save her mother, only to be slapped in the face by this reality that she could actually lose her much more sooner than she thought, which then begs the question if everything she's done, including the corruption, was actually worth it. Which could actually be a great song. This could actually feed into the songwriting as well and help ground the songs and actually give them a much more deeper theme, which I feel the music lacked. Now the crisis can actually stick with what we already have. She gets kidnapped. Now, of course, from her perspective, she has no idea who took her yet. Then, of course, the climax is very simple. After getting kidnapped, it's revealed that she was actually kidnapped by, the most powerful man in Mexico. He offers her money, and what he offers her is that if she agrees, he's going to immediately fly her sister off to Switzerland to get help from the best specialist in the world. And of course, he's going to deposit $2 million into a offshore account after she completes the job. So that actually makes a lot more sense, and it actually gives us a lot more room to work with when it comes to Rita's character. And that's Act 2. We don't really need much for Act 2. It's the first and second act, so we need to keep it simple while also helping us build the world and give us more insight about the characters. So moving on to Act 3 is when things start kicking into action. Honestly, it's 2025. I believe almost every single person knows how the transitioning surgery works. So really, that Thailand sequence is absolutely unnecessary. Actually, one of my favorite books, titled Elements of Style by an author called William Strunk Jr., one of the things he talks about is actually how, if a sentence is unnecessary, it should be removed, and that authors should strive to remove clutter in their writing, that every sentence should have a purpose, every word in the sentence should have a purpose, every paragraph in that story should have a purpose, every act, every scene, every chapter, so on and so forth. So obviously then, if we take a look at the Thailand sequence, if we remove that from the movie still makes sense. And if you remove the scene where the doctor is hesitant and needs to meet with Manitas, and if you remove that from the movie, it still makes sense. So Act 3 should flow as follows. The protagonist is obviously going to be Emilia. The antagonist is actually going to be very simple. It's going to be the surgery itself, whether there'll be complications, how it'll work. The inciting incident is, of course, going through with the surgery. Of course, her desire is to undergo the surgery, have the transition without any complications or any health problem. Then the crises could be that, while she's recovering, she begins to yearn for her children, begins to miss her children. And of course, the climax could be when she decides to go off and try to find Rita in order to help her locate her children, which she instructed to, help disappear into the grid. And that's the third act. The third act, very, very simple, just covers the transition, but mainly what's important is her experience of the transition and the after effects of having it versus, that whole Thailand sequence that they showed us, which was completely unnecessary. So for this arc, our protagonist is Rita, our antagonist is death itself, and this would be in the form of her losing her sister anyway. Maybe the surgery has complications. So the way it would flow would be that Rita helps the family settle in, and initially her desire is to help the family settle in and really to help take care of them. And that would be the inciting incident, her seeking to help the family and take care of them. And then the crisis could be her actually losing her sister due to the complications of the surgery, and that actually sending her down a spiral of self-destruction. So she could be going out clubbing too much, drinking too much, doing drugs a lot, and that actually could lead us to another musical sequence whereby we discuss the repercussions of this, right? So we would take a look at the fact that said drugs that helped enrich Rita through Manitas, and now it's full circle. While the drug money that helped save her and was supposed to save her sister is now essentially making a full circle return and is actually harming her in the long run. And the climax could be that she has an OD and that she's saved by Emilia, who was looking for her because she was trying to locate her family. And now the characters actually meeting seems less like the random encounter we got with that scene, but more of a fateful meeting, even though of course Emilia was actually searching for her. And the resolution could be very simple, that Emilia gets reunited with her family, and of course Rita starts recovering and maybe gets the help she needs or recovers in the family house. And that would be the fourth act. So the purpose of the fourth act is to really expand a little bit more on Rita and really help flesh out her character more versus just making her a yes ma'am. And by just fleshing out her character more, it makes it that much more significant when she actually does start the foundation with Emilia, and it helps make it that much more significant when she is helping out and giving back to the community, and of course understands the ordeals that they faced as well, considering what she has been through. So moving on to Act 5. So for Act 5, the protagonist would be Emilia again, and then the antagonist would actually be her haunting past. Another element I feel like was missing from the movie was we didn't really see any form of regret or remorse from Emilia's side. What we see is her just suddenly becoming a good person and using the very dirty drug money that she used by, even the people that were in those graves, some of them were put in the graves by her and her family. So we see her using the money that she had made from putting the people in those graves to then dig them out again and reunite them with their family. It seems counterproductive unless we add an element of regret and remorse. So what we're seeing here is Emilia having things like nightmares, battling with regret, battling with remorse, and having a hard time perhaps connecting with their children as the aunt again, because she feels that perhaps she is not worthy to be back in their lives again, because all they've ever known was the version of her that was the murderer, and she feels inauthentic or fake trying to be this good version of herself, despite the fact that she's done so many things which she has not paid for or has not made right. And then the inciting incident would be, of course, the lady who approaches her, or I think she approached Rita, asking for help in order to try and find a loved one. And of course, this would be the inciting incident, which then gives her insight on how she can actually do better and actually give back to the community, and then hopefully make up for all the wrongdoing that she's actually done to the community. And then the desire to give the story some weight would be that Emilia wants to honor her second chance as, the aunt in the second chance of being in their kids' lives by doing better, by being better, and by setting a better example. This is a much, much more stronger desire. And what's interesting about this too is then the theme of the music and the songwriting could be around whether everyone deserves a second chance or whether some people are beyond a redemption, which is interesting and would add an element of depth and an element of existentialism and really an element of philosophy into the music, which I feel the music really, really lacked on that part. Of course, the organization does well. Emilia falls in love. We'll pretty much stick with that, and that's perfect. And of course, Selena's character is actually falling in love as well, and that's actually working for her as well. So we'll stick with that part too, and we'll keep that in the movie. And of course, the crisis can remain the same, right? Selena's character wants to take her kids. There's retaliation, they fight, there's a whole, a lot of conflict around that, essentially, and it helps us with the songwriting as well, right? We can actually use that to dive back into the elements of whether everyone is worthy of redemption or if there are some people who don't deserve second chances, right? That actually gives, what we were talking about, which is giving, the music a much more philosophical and a much more deeper element to the songwriting as well. Then, of course, the climax remains the same, right? The kidnapping, the attempted rescue, which would subsequently lead to Emilia's death, right? And now, if you look at it, actually the climax has a lot more weight, and Emilia's death has a lot more weight and meaning now because of everything she has been trying to do, and of course all that turmoil she has been facing with dealing with her past and actually trying and actively trying to actually improve it versus just waking up and acting like, she's an entirely different person and all of her sins have been erased. Now, I'm a pretty philosophical guy, so I would actually leave the resolution out. Obviously, the resolution in the movie is, that Rita, is now taking care of the kids, and she's now the one raising them. So that would be optional. I would leave it out, just to leave a question of what's the future going to be. Are they going to find themselves back in crime? Like, just to leave a big question mark at the end of the movie. That's how I would go about it. And honestly, yeah, that's it. That is the plot. The plot is fixed. As you can see, there are some minor changes, and really the most significant changes come with adding 2 characters and of course adding some internal turmoil for Emilia and some remorse for her during the period of which she has undergone a sex change and is with her kids, which I feel really, really was missing from the movie and is going to help ground it a lot more. So that's the plot. Obviously, there's a few other things that need to be fixed. Firstly, the songwriting needs a lot of work. So what I would do is I would actually bring in a professional musician who writes music in Spanish. This could be someone like Rosalia, or in my opinion, a much more better fit would be Antonio Banderas. Antonio writes amazing music. I'm sure you've heard his music. His music is incredible. It's absolutely beautiful. And of course, he's an extremely accomplished actor. So he has a foot in both worlds. And of course, Antonio has given us 2 incredible movies that actually represent the Mexican culture beautifully. So in my opinion, he would be perfect and actually would help with the tone of the film. But that wouldn't be enough. I would personally recommend getting in a writer like Robert Rodriguez in this movie as well. He has experience writing action, movies, thriller movies just like this that are an accurate representation of the Mexican culture, and his movies are usually brilliant, and of course he has a very, very interesting way of telling stories. In my opinion, they should get him in as a consultant or as an actual writer to help with the tone of the film as well, and to really help ground it in that authentic Mexican culture, which is of course very, very important. All in all though, in my opinion, the movie has beautiful cinematography. The lyrics of the music were terrible, but the choreography was awesome, so he did a great job with that. And the music was catchy, the production was awesome. What was really missing was the actual songwriting, which of course we talked about, which can be improved. And of course, in my opinion, the acting in this movie was absolutely beautiful. Just, apart from Selena Gomez, of course, but everyone else gave a really, really incredible performance. And in my opinion, the best performance by far from this movie has been from Karla Sofia, the actress who played Emilia. She brought a lot of weight and gravitas to Emilia, and in my opinion, she really played the character beautifully and brought a lot of raw emotion into the film. So I guess what we can take away from this is the fact that, maybe we'll get to see her in more projects. Hopefully, because, the Hollywood elites are praising this movie. Hopefully we'll get to see her in more projects whereby actually the script is good and we actually get to see her really give us something incredible. All in all, I hope you found this video entertaining. I'm by no means an expert. I'm simply sharing my opinion on this movie, and will be doing so with future movies, television, as well as books in this channel. So once again, thank you for tuning in. My name is Chuck. This is Stories with Chuck. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and leave us a like. Please leave me a comment as well. Let me know your thoughts. Did you enjoy the movie? Do you feel like my opinion is biased and I don't know what I'm talking about? I'm more than happy to hear that. Please let me know in the comments as well, and let's all keep it respectful. If you're feeling generous, please consider subscribing as well. That would absolutely mean a lot to me. Thank you again for your time, and this was a long video, so I do appreciate you watching it all the way. Take care.